Handheld gamers were pretty saddened back in the days of the PSP and Vita when a lot of games not only stayed exclusive to the PlayStation Portable but never got digital releases to be played on its successor. This is especially true for Square Enix titles like Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, Valkyrie Profile Lilith, and most notorious is Crisis Core, the Final Fantasy VII prequel starring Zack Fair that showed how the main game happened the way that it did. Thanks to the VII Remake project, not only has Crisis Core been revitalized and brought to home consoles and PC for the first time, but it's made its return to the handheld world via the Switch. Here is my review of Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion for the Nintendo Switch. This game takes place 7 years before the events of the original Final Fantasy VII. You play as Zack, a member of the soldier military organization, as he goes on missions to one day become a first-class soldier and a hero. The story follows Zack through the Wutai War in a conflict where many soldier members defect and beginning attacking the Shinra Corporation with modified clones. The thing about the story here is that it's pretty good, but surprising in just how exactly the same they kept it. For those that have played the Final Fantasy VII Remake and are expecting there to be alterations and changes to the story in anticipation for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, you're going to be disappointed. This is a one-to-one remake all the way down to using the same English script as the PSP original. But there is one bad thing here, and that's voice acting. Just like the VII Remake, Crisis Core's English voice cast was all let go by Square and replaced by Hollywood actors. Caleb Pierce is the new Zack, and Tyler, Brianna, and Cody came back to reprise their new roles as Sephiroth, Aerith, and Cloud. Pretty much every English voice of the original Crisis Core was replaced. The problem here is the performance done by these voice actors wasn't very good. To be honest, I think Tyler and Brianna were pretty good as Sephiroth and Aerith in the VII Remake, but in this game it sounds like they just didn't put much effort into bringing the characters to life, leaving a lot of lines from Sephiroth, Zack, and especially Aerith feeling awkward, fidgety, and very unnatural. When it comes to gameplay, Reunion is an action RPG. As you trek through it, you'll navigate 3D areas, fight enemies in real-time combat, and complete missions to get rewards. Now first of all, is this a remake? Crisis Core was replicated on newer platforms as one-to-one from the original PSP game as they could get. It's the same game as before, but with many quality of life improvements to the visuals, game mechanics, and more. I wouldn't call it a full-blown remake in the way that Final Fantasy VII was, but it's got way too many changes and enhancements to call it a simple remaster. Some of those changes include the combat system being completely overhauled to be less intrusive and flow much more like the system from the VII Remake. You have dash and lock-on mechanics, skippable limit break cutscenes, shops are unlocked by mission completion instead of missable treasure chests, there's a retry feature for any lost battle. It feels like the same game, but also feels very different. And let's start with what's familiar. Progress hasn't changed between the PSP and Switch. Each story mission takes you to a place in the world of Gaia, from a Wutai fortress to the Nibelheim Mako reactor. You're mostly on a straight path, though you do get small hubs here and there in some segments of the game. The goal is to complete your story objective and unlock the next bit of story and place your sent for that chapter. And in this way, the game is still very simplistic with save points littered everywhere and not a lot of variance in where you go. All of the areas and dungeons are just as small and limited as they were on the PSP, which was likely done on purpose to make Crisis Core work as a portable game when it first launched 15 years ago. Missions and combat are where the big things you do are. Combat is in real time with enemies showing up right in front of you to fight, and this is where the biggest change happens. In the original, every action was a command you had to wait a delay for. In Reunion, attacks are fluid and not commands. You just tap the Y button for a combo with your sword, similar but not quite as fast as how you do this in the VII Remake. And instead of cycling a menu for all commands, you only do this for items, and any equipped magic and attack skills are triggered by an L shortcut. This makes it much easier to do combat and lets you fluidly chain attacks into skills. We also have further additions and changes to the DMW system and the Buster Sword. The Digital Mind Wave was a slot machine in the original that was purely RNG based that could give you limit breaks to use in battle and effects like no MP cost or endurance. This aspect has not changed. The slot machine is still purely RNG, where you could fight a boss and get no limit breaks at all and re-challenge it and get them constantly. But they made it less intrusive. In the original, rolling a limit would stop the combat and show a slow slot take over the screen and go into the cinematic for said limit break. In this game, it rolls in the background and throws the limit onto your HUD for you to activate at your leisure. You can also skip all of the limit cinematics when you use them, something you could only do for summons in the original. And then we have the Buster Sword. You get this later on in the game, but we have a new battle stance mode for it. This is similar to Cloud's Punisher mode from the VII remake, letting Zack auto-guard incoming attacks and set up counters. This also comes with proficiency. A bit of a grind, but doing more in stance mode will increase that proficiency and unlock some nice passives later on, like breaking the damage cap of 9,999, letting Zack attack with higher numbers. Now all of this sounds different, but really the way you do it is the only thing that has changed. Enemies still act the same way, you can still do criticals by attacking from behind, and all of the limits and summons have cinematics and then do area damage. And then we get to missions, the best and worst part of Crisis Core. As you go through the story and talk to NPCs in each chapter, you gain access to side missions that you can do from any save point. These are how you really grow and unlock goodies like materia, equipment, and shops. And there's still a lot to unlock because the game has 300 different missions. And this is where you can get overwhelmed, because let's be honest, doing all of these missions is not meant for your first run through the game. If you do, you'll easily shoot past the story and become an unstoppable killing machine. I only did about 37% of the missions my first run around the time of Chapter 7, and I was one-shotting every part of the story that wasn't bosses, just from the sheer amount of overpowered materia and items I'd gotten from doing mission after mission after mission. But that's also the fun element of choice to Crisis Core. You don't have to do these missions, but you can also fight through them to get the constant rewards. And you can do them from literally anywhere. Any story mission that has a save point lets you go into missions, and any unlocked mission can just be played from that point of the story. It's an incredibly accessible feature, especially when you get to later parts of the story where you're not able to return to Midgar for a while. The main thing here is that these missions get really repetitive. You go into a dungeon, fight monsters, done. Repeat process for 300 missions. That, and it's worth noting that a lot of the missions are missable. If you don't talk to the right NPCs in almost every chapter, starting with Chapter 2, you'll be forever locked out of getting that mission until you complete the game and go into New Game Plus. In some ways, you're really meant to do missions here and there your first run, and carry everything over in New Game Plus to do everything else. Now, this doesn't make the game any less fun. In fact, I think Reunion is more fun than the original Crisis Core from the changes to the battle system alone. And with that, let's go into content and length. If you stick to the main story, you're going to be spending about 20 to 25 hours from start to finish. But if you want to do all of those missions and unlock everything, it's going to be a massive time sink. Even doing less than 40% of the missions, my first run was nearing 30 hours. Next up is presentation. This game looks great. There's so much detail on the new models and environments. You can see just how big of a difference there is right here. You're currently looking at the Steam Deck emulating the PSP original with upscaling, which looks good in its own right. But here's the same sequence in Reunion's Switch port, and it looks incredible with visual fidelity. While it's true that some scenes have weird depth of field stuff going on with character models, and there is a little bit of blurring in handheld mode, it overall just looks good. The only thing we should make note of here are the FMV cutscenes. These cinematics weren't actually remade for this game. They're the same FMVs used on the PSP with some upscaling going on. The only ones that were actually remade were the summon FMVs and the epilogue. And the good goes into performance as well. The game sticks to a stable 30 FPS from start to finish, only having small dips in the cinematic scenes for summons. That's all I've got for that, so let's go into battery life. Crisis Core Reunion gets a battery range of 2 to 3 hours on the original model, 2 to 3.5 on the Lite, 4.5 to 5.5 on the V2, and 5 to 6 hours on the OLED. Now, in conclusion, Crisis Core comes back to the handheld world with beautiful presentation and loads of gameplay improvements. While the new voice cast didn't do a great job with the new dub, and the mission system can still get repetitive with how it was originally built, this is still a great way to experience the original story of Zack Fair while we wait for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth next year. Reviews to Go rates Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion for the Nintendo Switch an 8 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.